He has figured the world of words and numbers with equal felicity. Renowned economist Surjit Bhalla's fascinating new book, How We Vote, predicts the voter's mindset on the basis of data. The former IMF executive director has been mapping elections for decades now. In 2019, he said the BJP would win close to 300 seats. 5 years earlier, he was one of the few who accurately predicted a clear NDA majority. How many seats will the Congress and the BJP win in 2024? Will the NDA cross the magic 400-seat mark? In an exclusive interview to News9 Plus, Surjit Bhalla told us about his book and how he arrived at these numbers.
India votes for all of the factors that you have mentioned, but dominantly of a factor that you haven't quite included in that list is how well your individual welfare has improved during the preceding period. So for 2024, the voter will look at how her welfare has improved between 2019 and 2024. And welfare is defined very broadly. It's not just your income, but your standard of living. And this is a very well worldwide accepted that per capita income or wages are not the be-all and end-all of welfare. It is a whole host of other income-related subsidies that people get, income that people get, and that's how. And that is what I claim, and it's more than a claim, I demonstrate with solid evidence, and it says a data-led approach to assess how this model, which is that people vote according to their welfare, has worked for the last 60 years. One of the most powerful quotes about what I am established in this book was given by, at that time, candidate Bill Clinton in the 1992 election, where he came up with this phrase. Carville, his major advisor, came up with it, but nevertheless it was Bill Clinton who said, "Is the economy stupid?" And it was the first time that somebody had articulated, and so directly, that people vote on the basis of the economy, which is exactly the point that I try and establish, that it is your individual welfare. And he had encapsulated in that one word, or in 4 words, it is the economy stupid. So that's the... Winning 3 elections is a rarity, and that is what I will read out as to how rare it is. And now I read out: winning 3 consecutive elections is a big deal in any democratic country at any time. It is highly unusual. Let us look at the international record for parliamentary majority wins. Margaret Thatcher won 3 consecutive elections, 1979, 1983, and 1987. George Washington won the first 2 elections unopposed and then retired. In any case, Nelson Mandela did not seek re-election in 1999, another very popular leader. In any case, the South African Constitution, like the US, only allows 2 terms for any candidate. Franklin Roosevelt won 4 terms, 1932, 1936, 1940, and 1944. The US law was then changed to not allow any person to serve more than 2 terms. It can be argued that consecutive wins in state elections are less difficult than national victories. That is probably true. But Modi's record in state elections is also exceptional. He won in 2002, 2007, and 2012, and won with handsome victory margins, an average of 49% of the vote and 66% of the seats. Neither Jyoti Basu nor Naveen Patnaik are close to this record. Basu's average vote and seat share in 5 elections was 37.6 and 60.2% respectively. Patnaik's average record is almost identical to Basu's, 37% average vote share and 63% average seat share. Tadun Gogoi of Congress won 4 terms with an average vote share of 36%, an average seat share of 46%. Only in the Northeast is Modi's vote and seat record challenged, most prominently by Pawan Kumar Chamling of Sikkim. 5 elections, average vote share of 57% and average seat share of 80%. I looked at, obviously, in this election, it is probable, and that's what our forecast is, highly probable, that Mr. Modi would win. And as you know, in India, we haven't seen anything like it ever. And I want to say ever because the first 3 elections were won by Jawaharlal Nehru. And it was like the George Washington victories in the US, that he was basically unopposed. He was a national leader, fought for the Battle of Independence, and after that was the sole proprietor of elections. So if you take from 1962 onwards, from 1967, we've had all kinds of changes, coalition governments, dominantly coalition governments, and changes in governments very often. So to get 3 victories in a row, which, as I said, looks likely, is a phenomenal record. And I don't think it will be equal for another 60 years. Now coming to Mr. Modi, if he wins now, it's 6 elections, each one of them by a majority of seats, certainly. And in the state elections, very close to a majority. This is, maybe somebody can finance a book on how elections worldwide have worked, but this is really exceptional. I had mentioned as to how Mr. Nehru ran virtually unopposed. And the theme of my book is that the economic record matters. At that time it didn't. So I will now read out this section on Nehru and early India's economic record. At the time of India's independence, the world was emerging out of the double whammy of the Depression and World War II. Nehru's 3 terms yielded an average per capita growth of only 0.6%. It is commonly believed that the international climate was heavily oriented towards state intervention, planning, and socialism. This was not the case. This was meant to say as to how, why his growth record was so bad. More accurately, the reality was a Cold War divide, with developing countries and its non-aligned leaders clearly preferring the example of the Soviet Union rather than that of Japan, Europe, or the US. To be sure, even the West was leaning towards more state intervention, but this was along liberal Keynesian lines rather than the draconian Soviet methods. However, Asian economies, excluding the countries in South Asia and China, preferred the Western model of growth with less government control and more economic freedom. It is difficult to overestimate the influence of the get industrialized quick model of the Soviet Union on the Indian leaders. As early as 1948, the Congress Party adopted the Industrial Policy Resolution, a policy document that was to become a formal part of Indian planning and annexure to the approach paper to the second plan in 1956. In 1950, the Constitution of India came into being, and it contained an important section called directive principles. These principles did not have the force of law. For example, the state could not be sued if the promise of universal primary education was not met, one of the directive principles. But the state was directed to adopt policies which would enhance the direction of these principles. And the setting up of the Planning Commission was explicitly in accordance to the directive principle. That Nehru was a Fabian socialist is well known, but the general impression remains that he did not let these sentiments affect his policy making. The Constitution, which contains his personal stamp, does not provide for much economic freedom. Intervention is writ large. Both in ideology and deed, Nehru was more than an armchair socialist. This should come as a surprise given India had greater economic freedom prior to and during the colonial era than it did at the dawn of its political independence. And this is what Nehru stated in 1958 after his economic doctrine as contained in this second five-year plan, 1956 to 61. And I quote, "Socialism to some people means two things. Distribution, which means cutting off the pockets of the people who have touched too much money, and in nationalization. Both these are desirable objectives." A dispassionate look at Nehru's foreign policy record also throws up several missteps. For example, giving up a UN Security Council seat to China, being betrayed by China in the 1962 war after all of India chanting Hindu Chini Bhai Bhai for several years. His failed economic record is one of unabashed state control of the economy. This passionate look at the economic record of India, which is something that I have worked on for a long, long time, as well as several others have, is one of complete disaster in terms of economic management and economic policies till 1991, when we first saw the glimmers as well as the reality of economic reform. Until then, Rajiv Gandhi had sort of tentatively walked in that direction. He didn't make it worse than before, he made it marginally better, but it was one of a disaster. And what is very interesting is to look at, which all of us do, economists do and foreign leaders do as well as foreign economists do, is to compare India and China. And China started its reforms in 1978. India started its reforms in 1991. That 13-year gap still holds in terms of where China has reached in terms of its per capita income and where India has reached. So just the delay, there really is not much difference in the economic performance of India post 1991 and China's performance from 1978 onwards. So that's the price India has paid for delaying the reforms till as late as 1991. I had two objectives in the book. The first was to show what matters the most, and that's what we've discussed. The other is what you've just alluded to, is how data is used by Indian politicians in order to try and win elections. Now, there's nothing wrong with using data to show. Matter of fact, I'm a very, very strong and passionate believer that all data should be released and discussed. But what is interesting is that the data has become a tool of politics, and the politicians are quite unabashed in misusing data. And that's the story of narratives that I will first illustrate with regard to data on jobs. And I quote, "The grandmother of all data narratives is the one pertaining to jobs and wages in India. Job growth and unemployment are deservedly perennial political and economic issues, perhaps the most important economic subject for any society. It is not exactly the flip side of economic growth, but very close to it. If growth is present, can employment be far behind? And if there's job growth, can poverty decline not occur? And if economic conditions are improving, will the ruling party not be able to accumulate votes? These linkages are well known, and hence the concerted attack by the opposition to make the case that what the official data is revealing is inaccurate and or untrue." All of us recognize this appeal, and as an economist whose major share of research continues to be poverty and employment, I strongly believe that employment should continue to be a major focus of research and policy. Jobs and unemployment are important concerns for any society, for all societies. The economic narrative for India in the Modi election season is led by professors at leading Western universities and senior economic experts in India. Their story is that much needed job growth is not happening, and if it is happening, then wages are stagnant. Recently, Shashi Tharoor, both a leading intellectual and a leading member of the Congress party, opined that Modi had promised 20 million jobs a year and asked a rhetorical question as to from where these jobs will arrive. A good question, and as we will soon see, the workforce is not likely to exceed 7 million a year, and that is with an aggregate labor force participation rate of 60%. At 70%, the labor force participation rate, the jobs needed would be 8 million. Let me illustrate the narrative with reference to what happened in the 2019 election. And as I just said, the basic point, the basic message, your population is only growing by 10 million a year. Your working age population, 15 to 64, is only growing by 10 million a year. That includes everybody, unmarried, married, working, not working, housewife, whatever. So if that is increasing by only 10 million a year, how in the world are you going to create 20 million jobs a year? Now, I will read you that this is an ongoing process, and it was very evident in the 2019 election. And I quote, "It is popularly believed that PM Narendra Modi had promised a generation of 10 million jobs a year." Notice how the narrative has changed. He promised 10 million jobs a year in 2019, now he's promising 20 million jobs a year. We find, going back to excerpt from the book, we find no record of any such statement. In the BJP election manifesto of 2014, there is a following statement: "The country has been dragged through 10 years of jobless growth by the Congress-led UPA government." At a campaign rally in Agra in August 2013, candidate Modi did talk about the lack of job generation in the UPA years. In the speech, Modi promised that if the BJP NDA was to be re-elected, they would create 10 million jobs for the youth of the country, and youth defined as those younger than 35 years. This is the only reference to job creation in either the speeches or the manifesto. There is no reference to the promise of 10 million jobs per year that we could find. So just to illustrate, there is that the youth would be given 10 million jobs and no reference to a year, very likely he meant that during his term there would be 10 million jobs for the youth. As it turns out, that there were, in his term 2014 to 2019 and now 2019 to 2024, India has witnessed the highest job growth ever. And what is interesting is that the second highest job growth was during the Bajpayee period of 99 to 2004, and the lowest job growth ever in India was in the UPA period 2004 to 2014. The CMI data and its use by, exclusive use I would say, by the political opposition and by economic experts who are not sympathetic or do not agree or who are opponents of the BJP and Modi. No other economists. And I'll tell you that the data, the CMI data, is nothing short of horrific, and that people and opposition politicians and tragically opposition economists use it is one of the things that I have been most shocked about in this election. So the data that CMI puts out is, which is the most questionable of all data, the mother of most questionable data ever produced by anybody at any time in history, anywhere, is the CMI data on labor force participation rate of women. That is, what percent of women of working age actually work. The data put out by the government, the PLFS survey, is that that number today is close to 40%.
Wow.
40.
39% difference.
39. So what, no. Now this 40% of the government puts out. What CMI puts out, and its percentage point, but CMI puts out is that the labor force participation rate of women is somewhere around 9 to 10%. That is, only 1 out of every 10 women in rural India, urban India, everywhere are working. Now, let's see how realistic this is. There is no record of any country at any time in history showing such a low proportion of women working. Yemen, Iraq, war-torn economies show a larger fraction of women working than what the CMI says is happening in India. And you would think that the first thing an economist would do, politician I understand, they have to win elections, they feel they have to do whatever it takes, fair enough, but not economists. And that's been the tragic experience with the use of CMI data by opposition economists. The hot issue today, apart from jobs, is redistribution, and the opposition has come out with a plan to have an X-ray of assets owned by by all individuals in the economy in order to redistribute. So I will, and this book was written much before this claim by the Rahul Gandhi to have an X-ray. And actually it's very interesting. So in the early 1970s, President McNamara of the World Bank initiated a study to guide the bank on its policies towards economic development. Outside of the Western economies in Japan, the whole world was poor, dirt poor. The policy book was called Redistribution with Growth, authored by India's own Montek Ahluwalia, along with Nick Carter and Hollis Chenery. Since then, economists and policymakers around the world and economists at the World Bank have been chasing the ephemeral dream of redistribution with growth. There have been several growth successes. China, Vietnam, Korea, Indonesia, to name a few. But redistribution growth requires both growth and at least a stable level of inequality, or better still, a decline in inequality. No matter the prism used to dissect the numbers, the tax and redistribution record in India is impressive, and it has vastly improved over the last decade. But did this redistribution happen with growth? Here it is tragically amusing for scholars and the narratives to point to the second term of Prime Minister Modi as a failure. Let the record state that between 2019 and 2023, India grew at a lower than expected 4.1% per annum. In the first Modi term, 2014 to 2018, GDP topped 7.1%. The second Modi term was also witness to the greatest worldwide shock since World War II, COVID-19. Most scholars and policymakers would chalk up the COVID shock as an extreme outlier and move on, which is what India has done very successfully. Ignoring this one-off manna from hell, India grew at 6.6% per annum, and in the last few years, it has been a G20 economy with the fastest growth and possibly the fastest major economy in the world. And the IMF World Economic Outlook expects this resurgent trend to continue for at least the next 5 years. However, it is not the growth that has been so remarkable under circumstances of adversity, COVID and slower worldwide growth, but the redistribution that has accompanied it. The redistribution is not the fictional one invented by the 2017-18 Consumer Expenditure Survey published by MOSPI and the Government of India, or not published actually, that data was banned, but a genuine and successful attempt to improve the lives of the bottom half of the population. India used to spend 4 to 5% of GDP on leaky subsidies, and most of these were of the non-merit kind. Now, direct benefit transfers, targeted subsidies, and an efficiently run public distribution system means that 33% of GDP is being well targeted at those who need them. Many people argue that the subsidies being provided by the Modi government are exactly what was being provided by the previous governments in India. In particular, let's note that the Food Security Act was passed in 2013, which allows free food to be delivered to 2/3 of the population in India, which is approximately 800 million. Now, we've had food subsidies in India since the late 70s. So let us look at, and what the big story is not that these subsidies are the same as before, but that previously they did not reach the poor, they went into corruption. And now 90% of these food subsidies are actually reaching the people for whom it is intended. Recall that in 1985, 1 year after Rajiv Gandhi won the election by a historic mandate, he called in his officers to tell him as to how well the welfare programs were working. That is when, so after this meeting, he came out with the observation that only 15% of the money meant for the poor actually reached the poor. Subsequent research on this very same question has revealed that Rajiv Gandhi was an optimist. Actually, less than 15%, close to 13% reached the poor. The rest went into thin air, which is also known as corruption. It didn't go into thin air. It was people who shouldn't have been getting those subsidies got the subsidies. So today, about 90%, and this is not what the government of India states, this is what scholars, Western scholars, state about how well this distribution system has worked. And it's 90% actually reaches the people for whom it is meant. Only fools make predictions, but sophologists are sophisticated fools and who like to be proven wrong, and therefore that must be the case why they make these predictions. And as you said, I have been making election predictions for close to now 40 years. So I will read now the results with Nitish Kumar back into the NDA. If the BJP vote share increases by 5%, it would likely win 334 seats. This is BJP on its own. With a 7% increase in their vote share, the BJP would obtain 347 seats. A 3% increase in vote share for INDIA will get it to 165 seats, and a 3% decline in its vote share will mean a loss of 28 seats, total equal to only 105 seats. Even a 7 percentage point increase in INDIA vote share gets it to only 207 seats, some 65 seats short of the majority and even 2 less than what Manmohan Singh won for the Congress in 2009. The votes to seats math also makes a major difference in the final outcomes. For instance, in the event of a large anti-incumbency wave in 2024, however unlikely that may seem, the distribution of how the vote is split against the BJP is also important. On the other hand, the BJP is more likely to make major gains if it procures votes from its direct competitors in the respective constituencies. As of today, it is unclear as to who remains in the INDA coalition, how the seats will be shared between parties of the alliance will collapse entirely. This was written in February, so that's as of today. Our analysis gives us a base case scenario or the floor of what is likely to happen. First, the BJP's electoral dominance in terms of winning margins in the heartland states has significantly improved in 2019 compared to 1999, which puts the ruling party in good shape. Second, even with their combined might as originally plotted, the alliance could muster only minor electoral gains based on the 2019 vote share distribution. The swing model suggests that in the event of a national wave towards the BJP, the ruling party is likely to make major gains in the states of West Bengal, Uttar Pradesh, Odisha, and Telangana. In the event of such a wave election, it is possible that its win rate will rival that of the Congress in the mid-70s, that is 75 to 80%. Given the uncertainty over the configuration of the opposition and the very likely possibility of tail events happening, our forecast need not to be considered as fixed. Indeed, it is not. It should be considered intelligent speculation and just slightly more involved than who will bowl the next over. How did we arrive at this forecast? A sophologist uses, and this is not based on an opinion poll, this is based on reality, actual events, but how does one derive what the BJP or what the voter or who the voter will vote for in any forthcoming election? Now, one of the popular methods used by those who are not privy to having an opinion poll, who don't have the fallback, okay, my opinion poll was wrong, is to actually as you know, throughout I've stressed, let the data speak. So what is the data speaking on what is going to happen in the Lok Sabha election? So like some others, we also believe that the previous 5 years or the previous term of state elections are a good predictor of what will happen in the Lok Sabha elections. Now, it doesn't work all the time. Some states vote for one party in the regional election and another party in the Lok Sabha election. But generally, the tendency is to vote the same way. This is much like the midterm elections in the US. So these state elections are like midterm elections. It's the only hard data we have as for making a forecast. In the 2019 to 2024 period, in the state elections that have been held, all of them, we find that basically that the BJP's vote share in these states, weighted by obviously the population, increased by 5 percentage points. Now, in the national election, it's likely, obviously, it need not be exactly 5, maybe a little less, maybe a little more, but I don't think the deviation is going to be that much. Hence, our central forecast is that the BJP gains about 5 percentage points in its vote share. There is an interesting historical parallel, and which I document in the book, about the 5%. From 1984 onwards, on average, the BJP has gained about 6 percentage points from one election to another. From the historical record is that the BJP gains about 0.6% every year. So it is about 3% to 3.5% in terms of the next election. So that is given by the historical record. We are saying likely to be 5%. Another bit of historical record is given by what we get for the Congress. Starting from 1952, the first election, to 2019, and excluding the outlier year of 1984, what you get is there's a systematic decline of the Congress vote share by about 2 percentage points from one election to the next. For the Congress, by just this historical model, nothing else, we get that the Congress vote share in this election is likely to be somewhere close to 17% rather than 19 plus it got last time. So there is, as I stressed throughout the book, let the data speak. This is what the data is speaking about. Most of the time, the data speaks correctly. It's a matter of interpretation. Why is it that the same data people get different results from? That's human nature. But the broad trend of history around the world is that the data tells a lot, and we should train ourselves to listen to what the data is saying. This book doesn't claim to be a comprehensive analysis of voter choices in 2024. I've looked at some of the hot button issues that will undoubtedly influence choices with a particular focus on economic issues. There will surely be other determinants of choice when we get down to granular levels of specific constituencies and of individual voters and candidates. All countries have a problem with their statistics, and most make a constant effort at improvement. Private sector statistics act as checks and balances on government data. India has a particular problem with the survey collection and operations. There is no time schedule that is adhered to and seemingly few controls on data quality. Given our expertise with software, this would seem to be an easy fix. Part of the problem is that the private sector, which should keep the checks and balances, is not cooperating. Often, it offers even worse quality survey data. Public sector Delhi and private sector Mumbai, we have a data problem. There's a Mexican standoff, and all of us are losers. Hence, many people don't trust data per se, and this is why it is possible for opponents of the government to float data-driven narratives with assertions that are not only completely different from the official data, but orthogonal to any reality. What the official data tells us is that a large number of voters have reason to be satisfied with the performance of this government because their lives have gotten better between 2019 and 2024. Very few voters will feel the need to look at data when they make their choices. They know whether their lives have gotten better or worse. According to sociological data and our simulations, the INDIA partnership would need a swing of well over 7% in vote share to overtake the BJP NDA in 2024. I don't think that's likely. Why? Is the economy stupid?